In 1953, Iran became the site of the bloodiest coup in history. How did the CIA destroy a nation while the world watched in horror? Operation Ajax was not just a coup. It was a massive bloodletting aimed at overthrowing Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and restoring the Shah, whose rule had already been rejected by the people. Documents that have only recently been declassified confirm the horrifying extent of the intervention. The CIA launched a plan that not only shattered Iran's political landscape but also led to immense human losses. As stated in a secret CIA document, Hatch 47C, Code Unyielding confirms the direct involvement of the CIA, leading to massive bloodshed. Operation Ajax was so brutal that Iran barely escaped disappearing from the map. These words became a symbol of the shocking violence that engulfed the country. The CIA spent over $1 million to fund anti-government forces, including bribing the military, politicians, and even journalists to influence the course of events. This marked the beginning of a global game that would change the course of history. Let's uncover how this bloody operation nearly destroyed Iran and laid the foundation for future geopolitical intrigues that would affect entire nations. Iran, 1951. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who ruled the country, succumbed to growing public dissatisfaction, and his power was under threat. At the same time, Mohammad Mossadegh, leader of the nationalist movement, began pushing for a change in Iran's political course by implementing serious reforms. One of these reforms was the nationalization of the oil industry, which had previously been controlled by Western corporations, notably the British Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. This move acted as a warning signal for both Britain and the US. Mossadegh was opposed to Western influence, believing that Iran should have control over its own natural resources. This created serious tensions between Iran and its Western allies. The United States, particularly the CIA, could not allow this political evolution, as control over oil and gas resources was crucial for maintaining their dominance in the region. This moment was the catalyst for US intervention in Iran. The CIA realized that if Iran remained under Mossadegh's control, Western interests could be severely undermined. Thus, the United States began actively supporting opposition forces within Iran to prevent the country from becoming another socialist stronghold in the strategically important region. Meanwhile, Mossadegh and his government began leaning toward the USSR, which further alarmed the United States. To halt the escalation, the CIA initiated a secret operation that became known as Ajax. The primary goal of the operation was to overthrow Mossadegh, who was seen as a dangerous leader for Western interests. However, this only brought Iran to the brink of political and social collapse. From the mid-1940s, when it became clear that Mossadegh was losing support among the military and internal tensions were rising, rumors began to circulate that a coup might be imminent in Iran. These rumors were bolstered by intercepted radio messages that reached Britain and the US. On April 30, 1945, the first reports of a possible political crisis were made known among Western intelligence services. In them, the code word Narcissus was mentioned, relating to plans for a coup in Iran. This word became the symbol of a covert operation being conducted under the cover of national and international interests. This signal was crucial for the CIA, which began actively working with the Iranian military to organize the coup. The intelligence service reported that by this time, Mossadegh had lost the support of key military figures, and there was an opportunity to change the power dynamics in the country. But why did the code word Narcissus become so important? Why did this word echo so loudly? And why was it kept secret for decades? According to declassified documents, available only many years later, Narcissus was a coded message that pointed to a plan for destabilizing Iran through military force and mass protests, organized with the support of Western powers. Iran became a battleground for the strategic rivalry between the US and the USSR, which led to the deployment of CIA military forces in the country. and the beginning of an operation that would soon bring a wave of violence and repression upon Iran. Interestingly, even after this, the first suspicions about the coup were recognized not only by the Iranian government but also by CIA agents themselves. Although this was part of the operation, many of them had difficulty believing in the justification for intervening in the internal affairs of a foreign country. Right from the start of the operation, some agents began to express doubts about the effectiveness of the plan. Large-scale bribery, election rigging, and manipulation of the military led to CIA agents themselves suspecting that Operation Ajax could have consequences far beyond the interests of the United States. The operation involved not only interference in political processes, but also the creation of artificial tension among Iranians. In the end, the CIA bribed Iranian generals and officers to rise against Mossadegh's government. Additionally, a propaganda campaign was launched to portray Mossadegh as a traitor and an instigator of anti-Western sentiments. This was necessary to overthrow his government. What followed was simply the logical result of such intervention. Mossadegh was arrested, and the Shah returned to the throne. However, even after that, the difficult situation in Iran did not change. The people were divided, and a new wave of repression loomed over the country. The full details of this operation were never officially revealed, but the CIA's involvement left a deep mark on Iran, one that would affect its history for decades to come. Thus began the brutal game of survival that would bring Iran to its knees and lay the foundations for future conflicts that became a significant part of global politics. Agent Salgado was one of those directly involved in organizing the escape of high-profile individuals, including political leaders, from Iran during Operation Ajax. His role was crucial, as he was the one who received the first signal to act. The radio message Zaraya, which came through several communication channels, became the first signal to organize the route for evacuating the targeted individuals from Iran. This message was encrypted and contained specific instructions on what to do in the event of an approaching danger to those supporting the Shah. Agent Salgado, due to his strategic location in Europe, was tasked with coordinating transit through several European countries. It is shocking that all of this became possible thanks to the shadow networks that had been established well before the coup began. According to official data, the CIA had long established ties with certain political groups and military forces capable of organizing evacuations for the required individuals. Special attention was given to Spain, where the local authorities were prepared to accept those being smuggled out of Iran, based on agreements made long before the operation started. Spain became one of the key transit points, through which not only military personnel, but also high-level spies passed on their way out of the country. At that time, Spain was in a very specific political situation that allowed for the manipulation of such agreements. Although the Franco regime had its own issues, it repeatedly cooperated with external forces if it helped stabilize the regime or could bring benefits. And while this period remains a blank spot for official historians, in the corridors of power, there had long been discussions about the agreements the CIA had made with European governments. These agreements facilitated the creation of a network of safe houses and contacts for those who had to flee. The transit through Spain was also arranged in such a way as to minimize any potential complications from cross-checks or overly vigilant police. It was no secret that Spain at the time was at a crossroads between internal political stability and external pressures coming from the democratic countries of Europe. But it was at this moment that highly covert operations came to the forefront, making it easy and swift to move key individuals through Spain's southern border. Passing through European countries turned out to be more difficult than the CIA had planned. However, thanks to the established network of agents, they managed to organize the smooth movement of escapees through France and Italy. This was especially important, as by this point, Iran had already started to show signs of internal turmoil and the possibility of a military coup, which was an unpredictable factor for the operation itself. Yet, even when the first contacts were established and the signal for the escape was transmitted through Soviet radio messages, None of the senior figures being evacuated were safe. This created serious problems in case the operation didn't succeed. The encrypted documents related to the operation became some of the most discussed subjects in investigations many years later. One of these documents was the operational letter W9, which, at first glance, did not seem to have much significance for the outside world. But in reality, this document contained all the details that were crucial for the operation's execution. It specified the exact routes, dates, and times when the evacuation of high-risk individuals was to occur. Moreover, these documents helped trace the path of the evacuation and ultimately exposed certain problems related to the organization of the escape. These revelations highlighted the complexity of the operation, revealing not only the logistical challenges involved, but also the high stakes of the CIA's mission to protect its interests in the region. What started as a covert operation turned into a delicate game of survival for those involved. These agents, political leaders, and military figures found themselves caught in a web of international politics, secret agreements, and the looming threat of betrayal at every turn. The operation itself was not just a military or political maneuver, it was a symbol of how deeply global powers can manipulate the lives of individuals and entire nations to maintain control over resources and strategic positions. The content of the CIA's encrypted letters regarding the safety of the escapees only became public decades after the completion of Operation Ajax. These documents have become the key to understanding the scale of how the covert operation was coordinated internationally. They contained not only the evacuation strategy, but also lists of individuals who were to be extracted from Iran, as well as meeting locations and information processing channels between agents working on different continents. Thanks to such agreements and meticulous planning, the CIA was able to establish a seamless transit route through Spain, ensuring the evacuation of several key figures who otherwise could have been trapped in Iran's political conflicts. Moreover, certain documents, such as the W9 letter, highlighted one of the most confidential aspects of the operation: how to exert political and economic pressure while keeping the role of each participating country in the transition process secret. What remains of this operation now appears as a thin line between national interests and the real human casualties that became part of this global geopolitical game. But it is precisely these details, such as encrypted messages and transit agreements, that now allow us to reconstruct the events of those days, when Iran's fate and global oil interests collided in the most dangerous way possible. After Mossadegh and his supporters fled Iran in 1953, their lives changed drastically. What was once a massive political force with great influence now became a shadow of its former glory. In the midst of a political transition period, with Iran still reeling from the storm of change, they found themselves in a place that, though geographically far from home, turned out to be more dangerous and harsh than they could have imagined. Berlin in 1944 had been a symbol of luxury, diplomacy, and influence. Mossadegh, like many others at the time, was a man who moved through palaces and met high-ranking officials. But now everything had changed. He and his supporters found themselves in a lonely house in a remote part of Buenos Aires, where every sound, every glance, and even every step became suspicious. They were constantly under CIA surveillance, not only through their agents on the ground but also through additional channels that processed any information about their actions. The feeling of fear never left any of them. There was overwhelming pressure because each of them feared being betrayed, or worse, handed over by their closest allies. For Mossadegh and his followers, this became a real trial. They found themselves in a situation where there were no allies, no safety, and each one had to question all of their actions and even their closest comrades. The former political power meant nothing in a foreign country, where alienation from their homeland became an even greater test of their nerves. It was in this atmosphere of panic and fear within exile that a phenomenon emerged, which may seem absurd, but was, in reality, utterly real: paranoid suspicion. Mossadegh and his entourage began to suspect even their closest allies of spying. The fear of betrayal haunted them at every step. They started using secret codes to check each other's loyalty and to exchange information among themselves. The secret codes, initially employed for operational purposes, quickly became a psychological mechanism to assess trust within their shrinking circle. Every conversation, every gesture was analyzed through the lens of potential betrayal. This paranoia took on a life of its own, as the exiled group, once at the height of political power, now struggled to trust even the people they had once worked with. Even the most minor interactions became a source of tension. Every meeting, every phone call could have been a test or a trap. As the stress of their situation mounted, the exiles found themselves not just fleeing political and military upheaval, but also their own fears. The idea that the CIA or other foreign powers could be manipulating them from afar became an obsession. Mossadegh and his supporters couldn't escape the reality that they were pawns in a much larger geopolitical game, a game they no longer controlled. This paranoia led to the formation of secretive and covert networks. They began to communicate through these networks, always cautious of being watched. Mossadegh, who once stood as the symbol of Iranian sovereignty, now found himself questioning every move, every word. The trauma of the coup and its aftermath was not only physical but deeply psychological, as trust, once so readily given, became a commodity they could no longer afford. This environment also contributed to their ultimate isolation. While they were no longer in the direct political spotlight of Iran, the psychological toll of their new life, filled with fear, suspicion, and uncertainty, made them prisoners of their own doubts. Each day was a struggle to survive, not just physically but mentally, as the specter of betrayal, whether real or imagined, haunted them. Mossadegh's story, now intertwined with the larger narrative of international power struggles, is a stark reminder of how geopolitical maneuvers can affect individuals on a deeply personal level. In the end, the political battle for Iran's future left scars that were not only felt by the nation, but also by those who were caught in the web of international intrigue. The operation that brought them to the brink of survival had lasting effects, and for many it became a story of not just loss, but a life defined by fear and uncertainty. One of these codes was T8. It was a cipher used to verify whether a specific individual was truly who they claimed to be. T8 became a code of trust, and if someone failed to correctly decrypt the message, it meant that person was either a traitor or working for foreign powers. This code became an inseparable part of their lives, a constant check that kept them on high alert. Everyone began to suspect those around them. Even an ordinary cook who brought food, or individuals helping with everyday tasks, could be suspected of espionage. This fear controlled their every step, every word. They were in a constant state of readiness for any danger that might arise. And this T8 code became a symbol of the internal conflict that never ceased, even in exile. It was a situation where trust between people who had endured the most dissolved into the air, becoming vague and ambiguous. Strangely enough, this was the result of CIA operations, which, through its agents, imposed this psychological discomfort upon them. What followed became a domestic drama, where each day became more difficult and filled with stress. Sleepless nights became the norm. Mossadegh and his inner circle no longer had peace, as every new day was filled with unpredictable risks. Life in exile became a constant struggle with their own fears and a constant sense that they had become part of a larger game over which they had no control. The phone calls that came at night often made them tremble with fear. Since most of these calls came from anonymous numbers, they couldn't be identified. It was a real psychological game that took place every time the phone rang in the middle of the night. Sometimes the calls were related to critical events in Iran, and other times they were simply checks to see how they reacted to the situation. Those who experienced this paranoia know that constant fear can mentally destroy a person. At the same time, real eyewitness testimonies describe the cruel arrests and torture that were happening in Iran during that time. Unfortunately, these testimonies often became the basis for the exiles to start feeling as though they were under the control of this cruel reality, which did not allow them to live in peace. They knew that at any moment agents could catch up with them, even in their new home. This atmosphere of constant tension and hopelessness became their new life, instead of the protection they had hoped for in exile. These domestic hardships had a profound impact on their psyche. Leaders who were once at the height of their political careers now became prisoners of their own fears and suspicions. Their new reality became one big trap they couldn't escape from, as any attempt to flee only deepened their inner conflict. During the investigation of Operation Ajax, one of the biggest mysteries was the secrecy surrounding the documents related to the CIA's involvement in Iran in 1953. The archives, which only became accessible decades later, allow for a fresh perspective on the situation. One of the key sources is the 1955 CIA archive records, which contain many detailed facts about the U.S. intervention in Iran's internal affairs. These records confirm not only the CIA's collaboration with Iranian military forces, but also a high level of manipulation in political events within the country. The documents contain specific details about the U.S.'s role in organizing the coup that led to the overthrow of Mossadegh. These archives not only reveal the CIA's plans to oust the Iranian government, but also highlight the U.S.'s involvement in creating and supporting new political structures that controlled the country's oil resources. Interestingly, these documents not only confirm U.S. intervention, but also provide insight into how such actions shifted the global political landscape of the time. One of the main themes discussed in the archives is the U.S.'s attempts to maintain control over Iran's oil resources, which had become a point of international dispute after their nationalization. This control was not only economic but also strategic, as oil became a crucial element in the global battle for influence. In CIA reports, there was a clear indication that the crisis brought on by the nationalization of Iranian oil fields needed to be resolved, and for this, any methods were justified, from political interference to direct military threats. According to historical studies, such as those by Dr. Maria Kovalenko, there are 17 indirect pieces of evidence suggesting that the CIA's operation indeed led to significant human casualties in Iran. Her assertions are based on numerous archival data, supporting the notion that the CIA's intervention acted as a catalyst for violence that spread across the country. According to Kovalenko, while direct evidence linking the operation to fatal consequences is difficult to find, there is an abundance of testimony showing how the CIA's ruthless political manipulations led to hundreds of deaths. This included the repression of Mossadegh's supporters, who were arrested, tortured, and often disappeared without a trace. The CIA's merciless interference in Iran's internal affairs not only led to tens of thousands of casualties among the civilian population, but also contributed to the beginning of a broader escalation of conflicts in the region. Then, legends surrounding Operation Ajax over time merged with other facts and fabricated stories. However, after the declassification of the archival materials, it became clear that much of what was considered myth was, in fact, true. The documents confirmed that the violence was not confined to political repression, but also extended to ordinary Iranians, who found themselves targeted because of their political beliefs or links to the opposition. Furthermore, these archives allow for a better understanding of how external influences often replaced a country's internal needs in decision-making. This raises doubts not only about the CIA's motivations, but also about the enormous role played by international interests, particularly oil deals, and the struggle for control over oil resources. All of this increases the complexity of the operations conducted in Iran and opens new perspectives on the interactions between the US, the UK, and other global players of the time. As for the official and alternative versions of history, they are often in contradiction with each other. The official version holds that Operation Ajax was necessary for Iran's stability and the removal of the threat posed by the growing popularity of communism in the country. But new archives and documents from the Buenos Aires archive call these claims into question. The alternative data revealed by researchers point to another motivation: control over oil resources and the securing of U.S. geopolitical dominance in the Middle East. One of the key aspects is that these documents directly contradict what was stated in the official reports of the U.S. and British governments at the time. Instead of focusing on the fight against the communist threat, as was officially claimed, most of these documents reveal a keen interest in controlling Iran's energy resources. This interest was not just economic, but also strategic, as oil became a crucial element in the global battle for influence. In its reports, the CIA clearly emphasized the need to resolve the crisis brought about by the nationalization of Iran's oil fields, justifying any method, from political intervention to direct military threats. The contradictions between the official and alternative versions raise questions. Can we trust what we've been told? Or are we dealing with a systematic cover-up of history? Did the U.S. truly stand for democracy and stability? Or was it merely a guise to secure its economic interests? There is no straightforward answer to these questions, but the declassification of CIA archives indicates that we are only now beginning to understand the full truth about Operation Ajax and its consequences. Researching the Buenos Aires archives, as well as materials from other countries, underscores the importance of this operation in the context of global political changes. These documents reveal the true influence of the U.S. on world events in the mid-20th century, showing how strategic interests can become the center of political operations that change the fates of entire nations. Thus, Operation Ajax left behind not only political consequences for Iran, but also global reverberations in the form of new international agreements and a redistribution of energy resources. Its history is a story that requires further disclosure and deep analysis, as we are only beginning to comprehend the full scale and the underlying currents of this operation. The pivotal moment of Operation Ajax began not when the success of the mission became known, but in the moments when each participant in this dangerous game began to realize their life and even their very existence now depended on who would remain on their side and who might become a traitor. This was more than just a political wager. It was a personal stake for each of them, a bet on their honor, safety, and even survival. One of the most defining moments that became a symbol of how political intrigues worked was a phrase that became a sort of motto for everyone involved in the operation: "If it becomes known, you will have no chance." These words served as a harsh reminder for many agents and participants that any suspicion or unauthorized action could be fatal. There was no room for mistakes in this situation. As soon as any information about the operation fell into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic, both for those under CIA control and for those involved in the coup in Iran. This was not just a political risk, it was a life-or-death game. Everyone had their role, but for each, the role of betrayal was clear. Betrayal in this game meant not only personal defeat, but also a serious threat to the country's security and even regional stability. No one was safe from the possibility of being betrayed, even those considered the closest allies. The growing tension led to a point where everyone began to doubt the loyalty of those around them. What was the reality when even crucial CIA operations faced the risk of betrayal? These questions were asked every day, and the answers often failed to satisfy those who risked everything they had. Support or betrayal? This question became central to the relationships between the participants in Operation Ajax. It was at this moment when the CIA began to realize how risky the situation had become, that every movement, every step was put into question. But it wasn't just betrayal from within that posed a danger. Every agent, even those at the highest levels, understood that if their role in the conspiracy became known, no amount of connections or support would protect them from reprisals. In this world, there was no trust. Everyone was searching for their real enemies within their closest circles, and not everyone could understand who might turn into an adversary at the most dangerous moment. And in this context, just when everything seemed to be going according to plan, a time race emerged. A race where every minute of delay or oversight could lead to disaster. By July 1951, the situation had reached its peak. This was the moment when everything could have been destroyed in a matter of minutes. Operation Ajax, which had been meticulously planned over many months, could have been exposed due to one wrong move. At this point, it became clear that all these intricate manipulations, secret negotiations, and strategic plans could be derailed by a seemingly insignificant leak of information. So what happened? Why did Operation Ajax come so close to failure in July 1951? Behind the scenes of the huge political struggle between the US and its allies, a situation arose that could have exposed the secrets of the operation to the Iranian government and the international community. The risk of information leaking through unauthorized channels was extremely high. Eventually, the CIA and its agents realized that actions on the ground and minor problems in the organization could quickly bring this operation to the public eye. Everything seemed to be going according to plan when suddenly an unforeseen threat appeared. One that could have led to the exposure of the operation that had been kept secret. If that had happened, the consequences would have been incredibly severe. Not only would the political image of the US have been tarnished, but stability in the Middle East would have been seriously jeopardized. Every agent, every operation, and even the high-ranking officials involved in the scheme would have been at risk. It was an extraordinary situation where time became the most valuable resource. To avoid catastrophe, quick and flawless action was required. The situation in Iran, like the plans for the operation itself, became the dividing line between success and failure. The explosive situation that occurred in July 1951 was the result of pressure from all sides. Iran became a battleground not only between internal political forces, but also between global superpowers, each trying to determine who would control the region in the near future. The US, witnessing how many countries were trying to advance their interests in Iran, realized that if they failed to keep oil and gas resources in the hands of Western allies, it could seriously undermine global politics. Were there alternative plans for intervention? It turns out that other countries, including the United Kingdom, already had contingency plans in place in case Operation Ajax failed. They were preparing other methods of maintaining influence in Iran, including the potential use of military force if necessary. This further underscores how convoluted this political game was, with everyone acting in their own interests, and the final goal remaining one: control over oil and political leadership in the Middle East. The explosive situation in July 1951 became the turning point, when several minor mistakes could have turned the entire operation upside down. While the plan was ultimately carried out, it left behind not only political consequences for Iran, but also deep scars in international relations. Studying Operation Ajax on the surface does not provide a full understanding of the scale of this geopolitical intrigue. The US government kept a large number of critical documents related to the CIA's involvement in Iran in 1953 secret for a long time. Even today, decades after the events, more than 2,400 documents remain classified. And these materials could change everything we thought we knew about the Cold War and the role the US played in this global political game. Why are we still unable to know the truth? Is there something in these archives so important and sensitive that we may not be ready to hear it? What are the consequences of keeping this information hidden for the present day? These documents may reveal even more shocking details explaining why countries involved in such actions choose to conceal the real facts and what this means for global politics. What has been revealed in the archives gives only a partial understanding of the true picture of Operation Ajax. All these documents, which still remain hidden, may contain explanations of secret agreements between governments, high-level spies, and military structures that took part in planning the coup. Since most of these materials remain under secrecy, Any release of new documents could rewrite the history of that era and confirm that much of what we know about the Cold War was simply a series of manipulations and deceptions by the great powers. What is behind the refusal to be fully transparent? What is the real essence of the events that laid the foundation for the Iranian coup? Why did this operation become such an important part of the grand political game on the world stage? By leaving these questions unanswered, governments and large international organizations demonstrate how information can be used to change the direction of history in favor of the most powerful players. However, even after all the manipulations, intrigues, and crimes that occurred during Operation Ajax, the very participants in these events still maintain a sense of security, which, in reality, was nothing more than an illusion. The heroes who took part in the coup realized that fleeing Iran did not offer them final salvation. They would face even greater dangers again, and many of them became victims of their own ideals. These experiences are clearly reflected in the words of one former participant, recorded in his diary. "I lost my name, but I did not lose my fear." This phrase not only highlights the tragedy of these individuals, but also provides deep insight into how even the highest political leaders and intelligence agents who seemingly held power suffered a loss of identity and self-determination amid political manipulation. They, like everyone else, became hostages of circumstance. Most of them were no longer who they once were. Their past had vanished, and even without leaving the country, they could never return to what they were before the operation. This was all that remained after countless conspiracies, illegal regimes, and lies. These words also serve as a reminder of the deep sense of helplessness. Even after they reached a certain level of salvation, their lives still hung in the balance between competing forces trying to destroy them. Now, they had become victims of a political game they had never chosen to play. Fleeing Iran did not mean freedom for them. It merely marked a transition to a new stage, in a game where their decisions and fate remained under the control of others. But as modern-day researchers and citizens, can we blindly follow the official narrative of history? What do we do with the information that has been hidden for decades? Are you ready to question the official story? Is all the information we are given truly the truth? Perhaps we are simply being told what benefits those who control history, those capable of manipulating facts to shape their view of the world. This is a question worth asking for anyone researching these events. What we know now may be nothing more than a fabrication, covering up the real motives of the great powers and how they conducted their policies on the world stage. Once we uncover all the secrets of this history, we may finally see the true picture of the world. But for now, it is not only important to know the facts, but to ask questions. Only by doing so can we truly understand the real impact these events have had on our lives.